Well, hello everyone. As you can tell, I'm taking a relook at David Mamet's Oleanna today. Oleanna is from 1992. It's a very incendiary piece about campus politics. I remember when it first came out, it was really, there were stories of people having fights and arguments and debates after the show in the audience because it was a show that really split its spectators. I have some very specific thoughts about the piece and Mr. Mamet as well. But just to kind of give you a rundown, so the play, as I said, is from 1992. It's by David Mamet, American playwright, screenwriter, director, provocateur, perhaps the only playwright ever to appear on the Rush Limbaugh show. But anyhow, the play itself concerns John, who's a professor who's up for tenure at a college, and a student of his named Carol. And it takes place over roughly 3 acts. The first act is a meeting between John and Carol, in which Carol comes to John during his office hours. He is very preoccupied with business concerning real estate and the purchase of a new house. But he proposes to Carol that Carol comes by his office and they have kind of a one-on-one study session. During that meeting, he also makes some remarks that, taken out of context, could be seen as inappropriate, and he does touch her on the shoulder, which certainly can be seen as inappropriate. Act two is another meeting between them in which she has filed a complaint. Act three is when essentially he's being denied tenure because of these accusations. Um, I think one of the issues I have with this play is they really have the deck stacked against Carol. I remember when this play came out, part of it was, well, this is going to discuss campus politics, the politics of identity on campus, so-called political correctness. I mean, kind of all these buzzwords that really were being fed pretty much by the right-wing media about what was going on campus and, oh my gosh, isn't it horrible? There's women's studies and so forth. So I feel like this play actually has its deck stacked against Carol, in the sense that she appears to be very kind of clueless, aloof in Act One, and then Act Two and Act Three, she attempts to be manipulative by seizing the power from John. And by the end of the play, John has essentially become the creature, kind of the terror, the beast that she has accused him of being, even though we don't see evidence of that in the previous acts. But she pushes him to that, or perhaps it was always in there and he acts upon it. I I grabbed this play, and it's a long list of plays that's turning out over the last week that really don't put women in the greatest of lights. And I really think this was Mamet attempting to be provocative, and I think that he achieves that. I mean, he is a provocateur. He's pushing for a conversation and evaluation of some of this. I think the scenes are interesting for, say, an acting class and so forth. The film version is atrocious. It is not one that I would recommend to you. It's a very awkward transition um, to film. Um, but I've actually never seen it performed live, and it would be interesting. I would be interested in seeing it performed live because it's almost become a period piece, I guess, from the '90s. And I think that instead of setting off debates and conversations about the politics of campus, I think that it really now becomes a discussion piece of the kind of depiction of women in American theater by male playwrights in the 1990s. And that's something that I'm very interested in myself. As with Mamet, it's short and terse dialogue going back and forth. It really helps to have it read aloud. I think what's problematic about it, of course, is the politics. But Mamet himself, I mean, he's a problematic figure when it comes to his politics, specifically the Mamet that we see after September 11th. Not to say that his work isn't equally as intriguing as it has been. It's just his politics um, don't, uh, they're a little more, they're much more confrontational, is the way that I should put it, and they lean much more to the right. But I mean, Mamet is one of these artists that can really kind of move back and forth between film and stage, and also writing kind of incendiary, iconoclastic works like Truth and Heresy. Like, I mean, kind of his takedown of various acting approaches in the U.S. So, I mean, he's an interesting figure, and certainly I previously reviewed Neil LaBute, and I think Neil LaBute owes a great deal to David Mamet, as do many other playwrights today. So it's kind of interesting revisiting Oleanna. I think I really would have liked to have been in to see some of those early productions when people found it really kind of this touchstone, a piece that really divided audiences and started conversations. Because reading it now, I'm like, yeah, he isn't so inappropriate to her at the beginning, but he quickly becomes inappropriate, and the choices that he makes are, really not wise. And it did. I mean, there were some elements of it where he's talking about education. So the class he teaches is actually about education, and I think there were some really interesting elements. Of what their back and forth of the purpose of an education. So kind of taking the kind of the main thrust of the play that Mamet probably was pursuing, dealing with political and cultural issues on the modern campus, that being the 1990s, and looking at it as a treatise on power, certainly something he was getting at, but also the role of education, because I found like this kind of dialogue back and forth discussing education really kind of what's resonating with me now. I mean, and I do feel that once again, as I said, kind of the dice are a little loaded for the male character because I feels as if we are to side with him, and almost it seems as if are we to justify to ourselves kind of the violence that he takes against her. So cultural politics aside, and some of the problematic elements, it is an interesting piece that, as I said, works quite well for, say, acting classes because you get some meaty roles here and this kind of back and forth and dealing, of course, with Mamet's just amazing language. But also kind of this idea of what's the purpose of higher education in American society, which I think is a conversation that we've been having for quite a while now. So the play is Oleanna. It's by David Mamet. It's once again another play by a male playwright, which its depictions of women are a little bit questionable, but it's definitely one to read. It does encapsulate a time.